It was a summer night on July 30th, 2008. Quiet, flat, endless prairie stretching across Manitoba. A Greyhound bus, number 1170, was heading west on the Trans-Canada Highway. Inside, most passengers were half asleep, lulled by the rhythm of tires on asphalt. Among them was Tim McLean, a 22-year-old carnival worker heading home to Winnipeg after a long day. He'd taken a window seat, earphones in, the glow of his phone faintly lighting his face. What happened next, somewhere between Brandon and Portage-la Prairie, would become one of Canada's most horrifying crimes, a moment of madness that changed public transit, mental health law, and the country's sense of safety forever.
Tim McLean's bus ride began like any other. Around 6 p.m., the Greyhound made a rest stop in Erickson, Manitoba. There, another passenger boarded, a man named Vince Lee. He was 40 years old, originally from China, quiet, expressionless, carrying a black duffel bag and a large hunting knife hidden within. Lee sat near the front of the bus, alone. Witnesses said he barely spoke, occasionally mumbling to himself in Mandarin. But after a while, he moved to the seat beside McLean, near the back, a move that seemed harmless at first. The bus continued on its way, rolling into the night. Most passengers were drifting off to sleep when, without warning, Lee stood up. Eyewitnesses later said his expression changed, from blank to something unreadable, detached. He drew the knife and began attacking McLean. The bus erupted into chaos. Passengers screamed and rushed to the front. The driver pulled to the shoulder, slamming the brakes as terrified riders poured out into the dark highway, leaving McLean trapped behind. From outside, they could see Lee continuing the attack through the window. The scene was unspeakable. Several passengers, including a truck driver and the bus driver, tried to intervene, but Lee blocked the door, brandishing the knife, his face calm, his eyes distant. The RCMP was called immediately. It took nearly 5 hours for officers to surround and contain the bus. Inside, Lee paced calmly, knife in hand, speaking to no one. Witnesses described it as if he were in another reality, unreachable, detached from the horror around him.
By the time police arrived, the highway was sealed off for miles. Armed officers surrounded the bus, keeping their distance while Lee moved inside, occasionally appearing in the window. When the RCMP finally entered the vehicle around 1:30 a.m., they found Lee standing near the front, knife on the ground. He offered no resistance. His face was expressionless. He was arrested without incident. The media quickly descended on the small Manitoba town, and the story spread across the world. Headlines were everywhere. Horror on the Greyhound. Attack stuns the nation. For those who had been on the bus, the trauma was life-altering. Some were treated for shock. Others never took public transport again.
When Vince Lee first appeared in court, his demeanor was quiet, withdrawn. Reporters noted that he seemed confused, disoriented. Over the following months, psychiatrists examined him and discovered that Lee had been living with untreated schizophrenia. He told doctors that he'd been hearing voices that told him Tim McLean was an evil force who had to be destroyed. It was clear that Lee believed he was acting under divine command. In 2009, the court found him not criminally responsible for the killing due to mental illness. The verdict, NCR, meant that Lee would not go to prison, but instead be confined to a secure psychiatric facility until doctors deemed him safe. For many Canadians, that decision was controversial. The public struggled to balance compassion for mental illness with anger and grief over what had been done. Tim McLean's mother, Carol, became a voice for victims' rights. She argued that mental illness shouldn't erase accountability and that those found NCR should never be fully released. Her grief and her courage gave a human face to an almost unthinkable tragedy.
Vince Lee was treated at the Selkirk Mental Health Center for several years. Doctors reported steady improvement. The medication, structure, and therapy began to quiet the voices. In 2015, under close supervision, he was granted supervised day trips into the community. By 2017, he was granted full release. Under Canadian law, he was allowed to live freely, under a new name, Will Baker. The decision was controversial, and it reopened old wounds. For Tim McLean's family, no treatment could undo their loss. But others saw Lee's recovery as proof of how deeply mental illness can distort reality, and how fragile the line between sanity and catastrophe can be. Tim McLean's story sparked changes in Canada's mental health system and in laws governing those found not criminally responsible. In 2014, the Not Criminally Responsible Reform Act was passed, allowing review boards to consider public safety as a primary factor before granting release. Today, the stretch of highway between Portage La Prairie and Brandon looks the same as it did that summer night. Flat, quiet, endless. Buses still run that route, and every passenger who boards does so with the silent trust that they'll make it safely home. For the survivors, the first responders, and the McLean family, that trust was shattered in one horrific moment. Tim McLean was remembered as kind, energetic, and full of life, a son, a friend, and a man whose future was stolen by madness on an open prairie road. As Canadians, the story forces us to confront a truth that's both terrifying and tragic. Evil isn't always deliberate. Sometimes it's the absence of control, the collapse of a mind no one saw unraveling until it was far too late.
This is the story of Tim McLean and the night that forever changed how Canada talks about mental health, safety, and forgiveness. I'm Stefon, and this is Northern Nightmares, true Canadian horror. Stay safe, stay aware, and remember, not all monsters hide in the dark. Some ride the bus.